Based on the recent developments in the Western Hemisphere, I wanted to shoot this video to fill you in on why I believe moving to a developing country could very well be one of the best decisions of your lifetime. And this video is going to be predicated on my personal experience, the observations that I was able to capture during the past 2.5 years, and where I see things moving in the Western Hemisphere and developing countries. This video is important because we have seen drastic changes since early 2020. Changes that we didn't even think were possible before. And what we have seen in terms of COVID passes, very scary stuff. You couldn't go anywhere in certain countries without carrying that COVID pass with you. It was just really, really crazy. And this continued. Actually, the EU voted to extend COVID passes for another year. Just happened in the past month, I believe. And that is just not something that a lot of people are willing to accept, considering the stage of the pandemic that we're in, considering that we're endemic now. But what's really stressful is, to have this much government control, which obviously has a lot of reasons behind it. And we're talking about, removing people's freedoms that have been built over the past decades. Like, the freedom that we have enjoyed over the past decades has never been present in human history, just never. And now governments notice that, okay, if we give our citizens, if we give our population too much freedom, it actually hurts us because we are losing control, which was one of the reasons why governments introduced COVID passes, vaccine passes, because they want to get people used to using them. That's the whole point, because otherwise you could just run around with your COVID certificate, show that. You don't really need an EU digital COVID pass. What for? And I'm not happy with what I saw, and neither are people that are living in Europe. They are just not happy about that. And that's just one aspect of it, COVID passes. And to capture information, that belongs to you and tied to a digital pass for an authority to be able to, take a look at it at any time they want, because again, if they ID you, then you have to show it. Central-based digital currencies, another scary development that's going on in Western countries and also certain Asian countries, we have to say, and also Latin countries. It's not just the Western Hemisphere. These systems are scary because CBDCs, central-based digital currencies, they remove a lot of your privileges which you had over the past years and decades, depending on how old you are. And with CBDCs, what is the case is that a government will be able to control how you spend your money. Okay, they're going to say, we don't want that Mike spends his money on, pornography. We don't want that David spends his money on cinemas. Whatever the case may be, they will remove more and more freedom that you had. And this happens, and this will happen much quicker than you think possible. And it's a scary part of the process that we're in, because we're in a transitory period now, where our freedoms have been removed. And I do think that countries, they want war, because again, war represents crisis, and crisis represents time for change. And whenever that happens, governments have the ability to control more, because there is supposedly a reason as to why you could limit someone, from doing something. You could prevent someone from doing something that's not really the case in times of prosperity, because in times of prosperity, everything is going well. So it doesn't really make sense to do that, right? But in times of crisis, you can say, oh, you shouldn't do that because, if you do that, it could harm you. So there is this whole psychology behind it, which people aren't really aware of, that we are aware of on this channel, that, a lot of digital nomads, a lot of expats, a lot of global entrepreneurs are aware of. And I think it is important to spread the word here, because things are going to get tighter before they get looser again. And another reason why that's happening with so many things right now is because, the Western Hemisphere, Western countries are trying to contain China. And what I mean by that is China has become pretty powerful, pretty fat financially, if you will. And with China becoming so fat financially, they have rebuilt their military to the point that they have a stronger military than the US in terms of active military personnel, in terms of like warships, planes. They got us by the balls big time. That's why Western countries no longer want to outsource more work to developing countries, especially China, because with China becoming more assertive, Western countries are on the lookout, and they have to be on the lookout because, we don't want to have a planet ruled by China, which is kind of contradictory because, the central-based digital currency mentality actually comes from China and has been imported to Western countries and also other developing countries. We're in a difficult time. I do think the governments are kind of forced to make a move considering how much prosperity we had, but that doesn't mean you don't have any other options. So if you decide to stay in the Western hemisphere, chances are your freedom will be removed more and more year after year. This is almost a certainty. It's almost a guarantee because given the development, given what has been changing, how it's been changing, things will change even more. What I'm doing in my shoes, I've been in developing countries for many years, and I know what it's like living in developing countries. It has good aspects, bad aspects, pros and cons, joy, pain. Like, it is really the whole spectrum of everything. But given the developments, given the recent developments in the world, I do believe that moving to developing countries is a lot better. If you want to escape COVID passes, central-based digital currencies, feminism, taxes, government control, then moving to a developing country, moving to the right developing country, because not all developing countries are the same. Some, for instance, like Malaysia or even in Latin America that are implementing central-based digital currencies are maybe not the kind of countries that you want to live in for the long term. And what I mean by that is really finding a country that doesn't have the capacity to set up a central-based digital currency, a country that doesn't really have the capacity to enforce something like a digital ID system because they just don't have the infrastructure to support it. In order to have that, in certain very undeveloped countries, it's going to take potentially decades to set it up. So if you're in your 20s or 30s and it's going to take that developing country decades to set it up because maybe the government, they just don't want to comply, maybe they don't have the systems, they lack the money. Now, if that's the case and you move to a developing country, you could have a phenomenal time in the coming decades, whereas if you would have stayed in a Western country or in a different developing country that has the willingness, that has shown the willingness and has the resources to set these systems up, you may not have as good as a time as in the country that actually has every reason for you to stay there. So the countries that are really interesting, that I think don't have the capacity, are African countries. Maybe even African countries where China is not present yet. And of course, Southeast Asian countries, but I want to say something here. If you take a look at a place like Morocco, in many parts of Morocco, you can't even pay with a credit card. How great is that? Well, in Tangier, which is one of the few cities in Morocco where you can pay, in some places with credit card. And if you go to other places in southern Morocco, you can't even pay with credit card there because businesses aren't set up that way. They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the technology, and neither do they have the willingness, the mentality to change. And that's important because change doesn't happen from one day to another. It takes place over generations, takes place over decades. So for me personally, a place like Morocco or potentially a place like Colombia is a lot more attractive than a place like Canada, Australia, because the latter, those places have the infrastructure, they have the technology, they have the financial resources, they have the governmental resources and willingness to do those things. And I think those countries are just going to have a much easier time controlling their population than a place, that's much more obscure, a place that's just, filled with people with old mentalities, old ways of doing things. And of course, COVID passes, central-based digital currencies, government control are just some of the things, right? If you want to escape feminism, if you want to escape taxes, if you want to get out of the system, right? If you want to really build this future of freedom, of less government-controlled living, then places in developing countries are just going to serve that purpose much better than the places that we used to know, because they just don't have these things in place. If you move to a country where divorce is illegal or practically impossible because it's culturally not acceptable, then you're setting yourself up for a better family life than you would have the opportunity to do in a Western country, because in a Western country, you know, filing for divorce is easy. You know, it doesn't take any witnesses, it doesn't take any major statements and they prove, you know, it just requires people to sign the documents and you're done with it. You can move on to the next person. And that kind of discourages marriage in the first place. It discourages loyalty. It just isn't the right foundation to operate on, in my personal experience and opinion. And there are also other benefits for those looking to move to a developing country. I mean, we're talking about living in a country where people are less entitled, less arrogant, less ignorant, you know, like less just wealthy, you know, because they're coming from poorer backgrounds. And honestly, I mean, the best times of my life happened in developing countries because the people are so open-minded, they're so willing to listen to you, they're willing to learn because they're coming from nothing, they're coming from zero. And their willingness to work hard, their willingness to just learn is different. It's at a different level than it is in a Western country where people have already everything. They're being spoon-fed. Everything is handed to them on a silver platter. They don't have to work hard. They don't have to make sure, you know, their marriage sticks. They don't have to make sure to get anything right because, you know, they have all the support they need, the financial support from the government, so they're very independent. But if you move to a developing country and you're there, you know, it is just a different experience. People have a different mentality. What do you think about the current world order in Western countries? Do you think a global reset will further advance in the coming months and years? And what's your opinion about moving to a developing country? Leave a comment below and let us know. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. I'm uploading new videos on digital nomad locations, travel updates, and investment advice several times a week right now. I highly recommend that you grab a free copy of my latest ebook, The Nomad Elite Income Booster, your go-to guide for creating passive income streams using the internet. And if you got some more time left, check out these videos. Thank you for watching.